Hello and welcome to our conversation about taking steps to improve equity, diversity, and inclusion in our places of work and communities. It is brought to you by the Greater Parkland Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Community and Social Development Department of the town of Stony. Effective training is more than just encouraging employees to tolerate differences. Successful ED&I training programs should teach employees how to work well together while respecting and embracing diverse perspectives. For today's conversation, we'll talk about how to ensure training is effective, including universal design for learning, using non-traditional training, and some key leadership actions. The conversation takes place between myself, Mike, Renata, and Ada of BadaB Consulting. At the end, we'll also take a moment to tell you about our recognition badges that help you take steps and demonstrate your commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now, let's get talking.
Thanks, Mike. In our last conversation, we discussed how to prepare before rolling out a training package. We talked about performing a needs assessment in order to identify any current or previous issues and gathering feedback from employees to gauge their interest, knowledge, and experience around ED&I issues and training. We also spoke about aligning the equity, diversity, inclusion strategy with your own organization's vision, mission, goals, and values. Now let's discuss how to use that information to create a successful training strategy. Ada, can you share with us any first steps to consider before an organization jumps into the training?
Sure, Renata. There are a couple of steps I would consider before creating a training plan or strategy. First of all, based on the needs assessment we discussed in our last conversation, organizations need to do their research and perhaps bring in an external ED&I specialist if they don't have someone in-house to train. Organizations will want to create a clear definition of what the training program should look like. A comprehensive training program will provide tangible ways to engage in respectful, trusting, and positive learning opportunities. This helps to build awareness and knowledge to reduce discrimination and biases in key areas, including gender, race, and religion, and others. Second, ensure your plan includes an integrated and long-term approach rather than a one-time training. Yearly training may have an impact in the short term. However, people often regress to their old ways of thinking and doing work. So instead, we should make training as part of everybody's day-to-day work. Mike, you are a university professor. When you're designing your courses, what do you take into consideration regarding ED&I?
Good question, Ada. Now, I do teach a course that directly focuses on ED&I in workplaces, but that is just one course. More broadly, though, I think about ED&I for all my classes when considering the different students who will be with me, in particular, trying to appreciate the differences they'll bring, such as levels of academic preparation and proficiency with written and spoken English, their lived experiences and life viewpoints, and ways of learning, including how they process information and demonstrate understanding. This means that in any given class, I'm using a variety of methods to ensure that students can access and meaningfully participate in the learning experience. As one example, I use closed captioning in my lectures. This helps students with hearing impairments, but also students that prefer seeing information over hearing information. Now, Renata, that's my practical efforts towards universal design for learning for any type of training. Can you share some ideas for planning training that is directly linked to equity, diversity, and inclusion topics?
Sure, Mike. I'll give 3 things to consider. Start with leadership. Number 1, change and especially large cultural shifts need to start at the top to be successful. As we've discussed, aligning training strategies with the organizational goals and values will ensure that the strategy is not cookie cutter and it's authentic and meaningful to the organization. Encouraging learning and cultural change across an organization, starting with leadership, helps all the teams internalize why ED&I is not only important for the organization, but also to understand the purpose and the roles that everyone will play to make this culture shift and embrace it. Second, consider inclusive recruitment. Once your leadership has begun with training and is on board and on their way to creating their training package, hiring managers and HR specialists who are not part of that leadership team should be trained. Addressing hiring bias and learning how to identify and mitigate their own unconscious bias is vital for any HR specialist or hiring manager. Inclusive recruitment training is important so that no one is excluded, obviously. Recruiters and HR are also the first impression of an organization. So inclusive attitudes, values, processes, and practices are important for attracting candidates who share similar values and are looking to find a home in an organization where they can be their authentic self. And third, putting inclusion into practice. Now that you've done the prep work and found the right people to lead the training, you can start to roll it out. There are endless training topics out there, but where to start, of course, is going to depend on your organization, as every culture is different and has different needs. An introduction to diversity inclusion is a really great place to start. This training would include the difference between diversity and inclusion, some of the common ED&I terms used, etiquette, and language. Inclusive leadership would be another topic area I would start with. Other common training topics are race, culture, religion in the workplace, LGBTQ+ awareness training, unconscious bias training, disability inclusion, and then training around cultivating an inclusive culture.
Now, Renata, I've noticed that a lot of our discussion is focusing on traditional training sessions and topics. Are there other approaches that can be taken?
Sure, Mike. Along with ongoing training series, organizations often do things like organizing ongoing ED&I mentoring for teams, both internally through peer-to-peer mentorship or leadership mentorship, or external mentorships through trusted ED&I specialists or knowledge keepers. Some hold events to celebrate holidays or awareness days that observe diversity and inclusion. Others hold sharing circles that provide safe spaces for people to discuss their shared interest in ED&I. Others still offer ongoing lunch and learns or create a framework for employee resource groups. These are all really great examples that more and more organizations are offering outside of the traditional training sessions. One organization I work for does fun team building events where they present their PowerPoint on their culture or their upbringing. It's a really great way to bring teams together and to create more cultural awareness. Ada, anything to add as we wrap up this conversation?
Yes, Renata, thanks. A takeaway for those still considering their ED&I training strategy, there are endless studies to show that prioritizing ED&I in your workplace improves, for example, productivity, turnover, workplace culture, the bottom line, and also the company brand and reputation, to name only a few. One recent study carried out by PricewaterhouseCoopers found that of 10,000 millennials, 80% reported that a diverse workplace was a top factor when they're deciding which employer they would work for. They're also likely to do business with organizations that are socially conscious and are inclusive in their workplace practices. Mike, would you like to share a couple of key takeaways for our audience?
Sure, Ada. So there are different ways to begin. However, two takeaways or steps from the session are action number one, reviewing your existing training for principles of universal design of learning and working to ensure that all training is inclusive. And action two, continue to use formal traditional training sessions, but also consider more casual approaches such as lunch and learns and sharing circles. That was a pretty good conversation. As we wrap up the session, I'd like to take just a minute to let you know that we offer a badge recognition program that is focused on supporting organizations in the early stages of action on equity, diversity, and inclusion. There are 6 badges available: leadership and capacity, accessibility, staffing, compensation, performance excellence, and learning. For each, we have a list of research-based practical indicators, and you tell us how your organization is fulfilling several of them. Then, we have a confirmation meeting and award the badge. There's lots of flexibility built in, and the point is to inform and recognize your first steps on the journey of meaningful equity, diversity, and inclusion. Contact information for Ada, Renata, and myself are on screen. Please reach out to any of us or the corporate office to talk more about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how we can help you. And thanks to our partners, the Greater Parkland Regional Chamber of Commerce and Community and Social Development Department of the town of Stony Plain, who are advocates of equity, diversity, and inclusion.